Welcome to Foundation Paper Piecing in the Learn How to Paper Piece course. So what we're going to talk about today is foundation paper piecing, and the two sheets that you will have in your pattern are going to be a layout page and your paper piecing templates. So what you will notice between the two is that this is the front and this is the back. Each of these sections is where you're going to sew, and you're going to sew on the lines. Each of them is like training wheels. Think of it, training wheels for sewing. So it can be a little bit confusing at first because why is this not the same as this? And it's so confusing, but just like regular sewing, we always sew on the back sides. It might seem really upside down and backwards, that why are we sewing on the back here? But if you took this and you were going to sew right along here, you're sewing on the back side. And then if this was a raw edge, you would open it up and you would see, ta-da, I sewed my two right sides together. So you're doing the same thing here. We always sew right sides together. And then when you're all done, you flip it over and it's this. So this will also give you your instructions, and if you print it in color, the green lines will show you where the templates are and where you sew them together. So then it gives instructions here. You'll join B to C, so here's B to C, and then we press, and then we're going to sew A to BC, and then D to ABC. So one thing that can be really helpful as you're beginning, keep your fabrics in the same order as when you selected them. So, you know, you have your tree here, you have your mountains here, or your rocks or whatever, and your sky and hill and all of that. So I keep them off to the side in the same kind of general layout. And then what you can do is you can write, this is the tree. And then you're going to write, this is the tree. And then this is a hill, and this is a hill. So then that helps you kind of visualize. If you want to go one step further, you could use a colored pencil. I wouldn't use a marker because it can bleed. I wouldn't use a crayon because it's waxy. Colored pencils can be really good. And then I just color in just here. I don't color in the whole thing. I just color in just a little section just to help me denote, oh, okay, these are all going to be together. So I hope that helps you. So let's cut into this. The next thing that you should notice is that I keep the template pieces in the same area, the same layout, off on the side, that I keep the fabrics in. And that just helps me to keep things really organized, and I don't really care for chain piecing because I tend to get confused easily, and then I will sew the wrong piece in the wrong place. And I don't like having to take things out. So we're just gonna keep this over here. I might move them, actually I'm gonna move them up over here so then I have a little bit more room to cut here. All right, I'm gonna pull the fabric back over here and let's get started. So I learned how to foundation paper piece as a little girl in the 90s. And this is way before YouTube. I had just written instructions and had to figure it out. So, you know, we've come a really long way to be able to have video teaching to show how to foundation paper piece. But what I have found is that almost all of the videos are just really junk because they don't teach you the why, they don't teach you the how, they don't teach any of the methodology behind anything. You're just, you know, left to your own devices, and it ends up being really frustrating. So my method is a little bit different. If you have foundation paper pieced in the past, you will see that my method is different, and I hope that it's much clearer for you, and I'm going to give you the tools to troubleshoot why things may have gone awry in the past, and in the future, how do I troubleshoot this? How do I get myself out of this situation? And if I come across any mistakes in my own sewing, I will be sure to show you exactly how to back the truck up and how we're going to get back on the train. So my first piece of advice to you is cut your fabric into strips that are about 5 inches wide, because most of my blocks are about 5 inches. I find that this is really a manageable size. Let's say we have 14 to almost 20, so that's about 6 inches. That's a really good size too, between 5 or 6 inches. But really, a rule of thumb is going to be whatever the largest template piece that you have, you should have a piece of fabric that is about the same width. So you can see I turn this on its side. This piece is going to be within the 6 inches, so any way that I turn it, I should definitely have enough. So this is the first thing. You don't want to be wrangling a big piece of fabric like this, because what often happens is you're going to have a little tail that gets tucked in. You go to trim it off, and oh my goodness, you've just wasted this piece over here. So I have found if I cut my fabric into something that's going to be a more manageable size, typically I don't go larger than 5 or 6 inches. Because I know that it is way too easy for a little tail of fabric to get caught underneath. So that's the first one. We're going to cut just sections into smaller sections, so we're not dealing with this whole huge piece of fabric. So we have something here. I've used this one for English paper piecing, so you can see that I have, let's slide in a piece of paper so you can see what I'm talking about. So I have a section here that I've kind of hacked into it, and let's take these pieces here. So this was going to be my hill piece, so I don't need that. I'll leave that back over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these on top. Now remember, we're working with the back of the template here and the front of the fabric here. So I'm just, right now, all I'm doing is I'm just looking roughly to see, do I have enough room here? And I can see that this is going to be a really, really tight squeeze. I could probably make it happen. So what I'm doing is I'm just sliding this underneath, because I'm only concerned about the fabric that is right here, because that's where this is going to be sewn. I don't need to worry about this tree. I'll lift this guy up, and then I'm going to do the same thing with this piece here, C1. This is going to be a nice easy piece. So actually I think I am going to use that. And I have plenty of room here with my seam allowance. The dotted lines are your seam allowance. And I have plenty of room, so you'll see this in just a moment, but you'll have to trust me for a half a second that I will have enough room here, because nothing is going to be sewn here. I do need to make sure that I leave about 1/4 of an inch for my seam allowance, so let's kind of give an eyeball, and you can see that I will definitely have enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this off right here. I think my sewing scissors have been relocated. Does that happen at your house too? Oh my goodness. I'm going to grab some out of my English paper piecing bag. Oh, now goodness, one thing that I didn't check, and it's a little bit trickier on batiks to see which is the front. So I might regret that in the future, and then we will problem solve that together. But let's have a look at this really quick. There's always one side that's going to be a little bit nicer for batiks, and if you can't tell the difference, then it really doesn't matter. So I think I will be fine. I'm noticing there's another little cut in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on these two. And I said I don't chain piece, so that means that I'm going to lay them out for 2 little template pieces, but I'm not going to be sewing them one after the other, because I want to keep it really clean inside of my head. Okay, so we've got these two, and I need to give this guy a press. Okay, this is going to be the back. So number one, you want to make sure that you have the right side facing down and the wrong side facing up. Okay, this is just for step number one. All right, so the next thing that I want to draw your attention to is we have A1 and A2, C1 and C2. So typically for these, it's telling you what your placement is going to be. But I have already chosen this first because I had a little piece hacked out of it, and I want to make sure that I'm maximizing all of the fabric that I can. This is one of the things I absolutely love about both English and foundation paper piecing is that there is hardly any waste. When I throw a fabric away, it's like teeny weeny, little itty bitty. Like, you're not going to use it for absolutely anything. I'm not throwing anything away that, you know, is 2 or 4 inches or anything like that. All of that can be reused. So I have this nice little piece of fabric, and I have A2 and A1. Now, here's the only thing that you can interchange are number 1 and number 2. You cannot start with piece 3. You can either choose to start with 1 or 2, and that's it. So you can interchange where you're going to place number 1 and number 2 for the first step only. Okay? I hope that makes sense. It will make more sense as we go along. So for this one, because I have this already cut out, I'm going to place my fabric here first, and then I'm going to place A1 here next. And the reason is because these two pieces here, you're going to sew along this line, but if you put a piece of fabric here first, you would have a Y seam, and it's a pain in the neck to try to fix. So for 1 or 2, these are interchangeable. That's it. Those are the only ones. Okay? So let's see. Now what I'm going to do, because I don't think I did it properly at the very beginning. Remember I said I might regret it? Let's see. Let's see, because I looked at the wrong side and I should have paid more attention. Maybe I did it this way. See, I bet this is what I did, but I don't remember anymore. I bet that's what I did. Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm maximizing the most amount of space on my block or on my fabric, that I don't want to waste anything, that I'm laying out the 2 pieces that I know I will need this sweet piece of fabric for. Okay, so introducing my favorite glue stick. I love these white glue sticks, and I will tell you all about them in the essentials video. But I joke that I'm really a kindergartner because I like scissors, paper, and glue sticks. So what I have done is I've laid these out where I want the fabric to be. This will make sense in just a moment, and I'm going to put just a bit of glue on the back. I don't need a whole bunch. All I need it to do is to just stay in place. Okay, for the next one, I'm going to put it in the A2 section. Okay, and they are stuck. Perfect. So what you will see here is that I have left plenty around all of these outside edges. These are going to be the outsides. I don't trim template pieces down at the very beginning, because with smaller blocks, even with larger blocks, the fabric and the paper add extra bulk and they shift. So I want to make sure that I have extra around all of the sides so that when I'm ready to sew these together, then I will trim them. I leave the outside untrimmed. There are a few exceptions. Typically I leave the outside untrimmed, and I'm giving myself just about, maybe about 1/8 of an inch maybe about a 1/16 of an inch, just enough that I have a little bit of wiggle room. I call it a seam allowance because they are allowing this room here, so that if you need to do some shimmying, you've got that allowance. You really don't want to go below 1/8 of an inch for a seam allowance, because then it's going to compromise your seams. But we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I need to make sure that I move this section over. A3 needs to move. And another difference is that I don't score all of my lines, because what happens if you score every single line before you start sewing, you have already started to compromise this whole entire block. And then if you make a mistake and you've punctured through, you know, sewing on these lines, the whole block becomes more fragile and more compromised. So I find that I'm going to just score like the next piece or maybe one after that. So this is one after where I'm going to be sewing, because we're going to be sewing on the line between the two sections to join them together. Remember, right sides together. And so I'm just moving this piece of paper over so that I can cut along here. Okay. I'm going to give this guy a trim. Now remember, I want to reiterate this because this is the part that confuses a lot of people. We sew on the back. Anytime we sew, we always sew on the back, right sides together. So on your very first piece and no other piece, I mean of all of the templates, your very first piece of all of each template, you want to have the wrong sides together. So we have right side here and right side here, and it'll be clearer as we go along. You know, batiks can be pretty tricky to determine which side is the right side, and then solids also. And if you have a solid, don't even worry about it because they're solid. Okay, so let's work with just this one so that we can understand this. We have lots of room all around the edges. Okay, we're going to score. This has only one, so we're going to score just this one line. I really love this ruler, and I have noticed that rulers, as exacting as they are, have one side that's a little bit different than the other side. So that's what this tape is here. This tape shows me that this is the side that I want to use. There's some dotted lines here. I have little grippies here. These are essentials for me because safety first. I never, ever, ever use this side. You always want to have the same side that you're cutting with because there's just a very, very slight difference. I also really do not like the add-a-quarter rulers because there's a lip and they're not very accurate. I've noticed that when sewers have issues, it's because they're using an add-a-quarter ruler or something else. So you can use any ruler. This is a Creative Grids, and I think it's 4.5 by 8. And this is just a really great size to be able to, I don't use it for squaring up blocks because it's not quite large enough for me, but I use this one for scoring. So let's do this here. Actually, I'll do it here. There's a little bit of a lip here, so that makes it a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the outside of my ruler along the top, right in the center of the printed line between C1 and C2. I'm going to slip my finger underneath, and I'm not going to score this really hard. I'm not going to take my thumbnail and run it across. I just want a light score. You can see how this is just kind of a light score. All I need it to do is just move over. So I'm going to just take my fingernail. I don't have very long nails. I'm going to just fold it over, and then I'm going to press. Okay, we're not going to scrape it with the side of your thumbnail or with anything else because it doesn't have to be a really hard crease. It just needs to be enough of a crease that I can place my ruler on top of. I'm bringing this up so you can see it. I'm going to line up the dotted edge of the quarter of the where it says, you know, this is showing a 1/4 inch seam allowance with the folded edge. So we have the solid line here with the folded edge here. So this is on top, and I'm going to trim this off. Okay, so now, you know, right sides together. This is nothing new and different, right? Okay, I need to check and make sure, what is the next piece that I have? And it is mountains, so I need just a little bit. I don't even think that I've cut into this one yet. So I'm just gonna hack off just a little bit because I don't need a whole lot. I'm just kind of giving this an eyeball. I know that the amount of fabric that I need is going to be this wide because I need a seam allowance plus a little bit. So, you know, I like to have things about 5 or 6 inches. So I'm just going to cut a section that is about 5 by 6. And then when I'm done with this, I'll just tuck it inside so that I know I have a little bit extra to use. Now, the reason that I didn't cut this down smaller is because in case I make a mistake, I want to make sure that I have plenty of fabric left over, because let's be honest, it's really not fun making a mistake. It's really, really frustrating, and I want to do anything to mitigate error, and I just want to sew and have fun. That's what I'm just here to have a really good time. Okay, so next step. This is the second place where a lot of teachers do not explain where fabric placement should be. If you have your template open like this, you would probably place your piece right along here because your brain would say, this is where my seam allowance is. I'm going to pin this and sew this, and then what happens if you have it here, this is a situation where it would probably be okay, but there are a lot where it's not. You would end up cutting off what you had just sewn if you're going to use this method. So what I teach instead is, remember we folded this over so that we got the 1/4 seam allowance. Keep that folded over and line up this line here. This is your seam allowance. Don't worry about this because this is your template. So if you think of, you know, a traditional block as you sew your squares or half square triangles together, or you know, any different shape, you have a seam allowance and it grows and, you know, it changes and all of that. So think of it the same way, that we want to sew this. This is our seam allowance here. So we need to make sure, you know, if we're going to sew here, I'm not really worried about what's going on over here. I want to know, do I have enough for a seam allowance? And it's getting really, really close over here. I don't like that. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more. Now the next thing is I want to make sure that I have fabric under this piece when it is closed, when your template piece is closed. For the piece that you are sewing next, so we're going to be sewing C2 to C1, I want to make sure that I have fabric right here. So here's another thing that people will sometimes do, is they will say, oh, I need a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we have this here and this here, and I can see, oh, I'll have a 1/4 inch here. So then we sew it, and all you're left with is this little bit right here, because you treated it with the template open. So that is typically problem number 1, and that gets to be so frustrating. That was not explained to me when I was relearning as an adult how to foundation paper piece. It was so frustrating. So close your template piece, and the piece that you are sewing, you will only be concerned about what is in this section here where it is closed. Now you can see my seam allowance is over here, so I want to make sure that I have lots and lots of room. So this is going to be really fantastic. That is going to work, and this will make sense as we go along. You know, for a piece that has just 2 little sections, it may seem like it's a little bit overkill. to explain it. Okay, so for the next part, we're going to sew together. And I do not really worry about what color thread I have in my machine, as long as it is not a black or a white. And the reason is because those two will really shine through. I have olive on the top and the bottom, but another thing that I really like to do is I like to mix them. So olive is just kind of, you know, it's going to be in the middle between all of these colors, so it's going to blend really well. Let me show you here. I used olive thread for these. Can you see that? Probably not terribly well, but I used olive thread. And can you see that I used olive thread? Not really. And then if you can see thread, when your whole quilt top is put together, you won't be able to notice it all. So I wouldn't stress too much about it unless it is white or black. And so just kind of change it to something in the middle. So the next thing that you will need to do on your machine is you will need to lower the stitch. I have mine set at 1.6 millimeters. If you have an older machine that just has stitches per length, I think you want about a 20 or 25. I think 30 might be too many. So play with that a little bit. You want to have really short stitches. What that will do is that will help you when you're tearing it, that it'll become nicely perforated. See, isn't that so nice and smooth? Oh, it's so delightful. So if you have a shorter stitch length, you know, it's making a lot of really small perforations. If you have a longer stitch length, what will happen is the fabric will want to pull and distort with the paper. The next thing is make sure that your needle is in the center of your foot. And you'll need to play around with it. On my machine, I do have to change things up a little bit just because what the manufacturer has said for middle of the foot is actually not. So play around with it, because what we are going to do is we are going to be sewing with training wheels right along the line. And I call it with training wheels because I cannot sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance without doing it this way. It just drives me crazy. So this is just like, it's really kindergarten. So there's nothing that is difficult about this. So the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to be sewing from a little bit before the line to a little bit after the line, and you do not need to backstitch at all. None whatsoever, because the stitches are just going to hold in place. All right, so a little bit before to a little bit after. Sewing right along the line. Okay, to a little after. All right, and this is what we have. Just a little bit before to a little bit after. Okay, so you might be tempted to cut first, and then, or iron first and then cut. But I would like to encourage you to fold that template over. Now you can see why this gets so much manhandling that, you know, open, close, it's really going to make the paper more fragile. Okay, so let me tell you what I'm doing. So you might be tempted, like I was saying, to iron first and then cut, and I encourage you not to do that, because what will happen is that you will probably cut off what you just sewed. So if you cut and then iron, you are not going to cut off with what you just sewed. So you can see here that I have just a little bit. Sometimes I'll let that, it depends on how much of a hurry I'm in, how bulky the piece is going to be in the end. I might leave it, but for today I'm going to cut it. And just like I did to cut the hill piece, I'm going to do the same thing. Line up the 1/4 inch edge, 1/4 inch marking with the edge of the folded over template, not open, folded over, and I'm going to trim off this piece. Okay. Put that over to the side. Okay, now we're going to open this guy back up. And we'll give it a press. All right, so here's the second place that I like to use glue, and it's for the end flappy bits. So in this template, there are only 2 pieces. You won't glue down every single piece. It's only when you have a beginning and an end, basically. Or if there are lots of pieces that have little bits that could lift up, because I don't like having those they can get tucked underneath, and I don't like that. So I'm going to put just a little bit of glue over here on the template piece. You could put it on the fabric too, but the template is just as easy, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra room. I need a new rotary blade, evidently. All right, so we have piece number 1 completed. So you can pause the video at this point, and you can get caught up on C1 and C2. It should look like this when you're done, or you can watch this in the entirety and come back when you're ready to sew. I'm not going to be sewing all of the pieces together. I'm just going to sew this one because it's going to be the exact same process for B, and then when it comes time to put the block together, then I will show you how I trim them all down.